All right, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling a true legend, Rene Descartes.
Descartes.
The I think, therefore I am guy. But he was so much more than that. A philosopher, a mathematician, scientist.
A real Renaissance man.
Exactly. And even centuries later, his work still blows my mind. Like, it shapes how we think today.
Well, it's fascinating, right? Because Descartes wasn't just some isolated genius. He was living through some seriously crazy time.
Yeah, the 17th century, not exactly a walk in the park.
No, not at all. Think about it. Wars of religion, people losing faith in authority. It was chaos.
Yeah, so much upheaval.
And that chaos, it really pushed him to seek some sort of solid ground for knowledge, something he could be absolutely certain of, like an anchor in a stormy sea.
Wow, that makes so much sense. So, like, in that world gone wild, he needed something to hold on to.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how did he end up rejecting the traditional way of thinking back then? I mean, wasn't everyone just following Aristotle and the church's teachings?
Right, that was the scholastic philosophy of the time. But Descartes, he wasn't satisfied.
It wasn't enough for him.
Not at all. He saw it as, well, kind of dogmatic, just accepting things without questioning. He craved something more solid, more evidence-based.
He wanted proof.
Exactly. And where did he find it? Math.
Math.
Yeah, math. To him, it was the perfect model. Clear, logical, building complex ideas from simple, undeniable truths.
I see. So it was like the ultimate proof.
Exactly. And he wanted that same kind of rigor, that same certainty for philosophy. He believed you could start with some unshakable principles and build a whole system of knowledge you couldn't argue with.
Like constructing a building brick by solid brick.
Perfect analogy.
Okay, so that brings us to his famous, I think, therefore I am. It seems so simple, but it really revolutionized how we think about ourselves. How did he even come up with that?
Well, he went deep. I mean, really deep. He used what's called hyperbolic doubt.
Hyperbolic doubt.
Yeah, it's basically hardcore questioning. He doubted everything, even seemingly obvious things.
Like, what? The sky is blue.
Exactly. He was trying to find something, anything, that could withstand total skepticism. And in the process, he made a breakthrough.
Which was?
That even when you doubt everything else, you can't doubt the very act of doubting itself. And if you're doubting, well, there has to be a you doing the doubting.
Wait, so doubting proves that you exist?
Exactly. It's like a self-evident truth. He realized that even if everything else is uncertain, the very act of thinking, of doubting, confirms the existence of a thinking being, a self.
Whoa. Okay, mind officially blown. So that's the foundation of his whole philosophy, this thinking self.
You got it.
Okay, but this thinking self, the mind, how did Descartes see that in relation to, our bodies, the physical stuff?
Well, that's where his famous dualism comes in. He believed that the mind and body are two completely separate things.
Two separate things, so not like connected at all?
Well, connected in some way, but fundamentally different. He called them res cogitans for the mind, the thinking substance, and res extensa for the body, which is all about matter and physical stuff.
So like two different realms almost.
Yeah.
But how do they interact? If my mind is this immaterial thing and my body is physical, how can my thoughts make my arm move?
Right, and how can something like pain in my body make me feel sad in my mind?
That's a great point. Like, how can something immaterial affect something physical and vice versa?
It's a huge question, one that still puzzles people today. The classic mind-body problem.
Did Descartes have any answers?
Well, he tried. He thought maybe the pineal gland in the brain might be the link, but even he wasn't fully convinced.
Wow, so even a genius like Descartes couldn't fully solve that mystery. It really makes you think about how complex we humans are.
It really does.
And it makes his work all the more fascinating, tackling those big questions even if he didn't have all the answers.
Right, pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
Okay, so we've got mind and body, two separate things.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the soul? Where does that fit into all of this?
Well, Descartes was a devout Catholic, so the soul was important to him. He believed it was immaterial, like the mind.
So not bound by the laws of physics like the body.
Exactly, and that meant that the soul could potentially survive even after the physical body died.
So even though he was all about logic and reason, he still found a way to tie that into his faith.
Yes, he was trying to create a system where reason and faith weren't at odds with each other, but could coexist.
A pretty revolutionary idea for his time.
Absolutely. It was a different way of thinking about the world, a more integrated way.
And it's not like he completely disregarded our senses and experiences.
Mm-hmm.
He recognized they played a part in how we understand the world.
Of course.
But he also believed that reason had to step in, right?
Yeah.
To make sense of those experiences.
Absolutely. He believed that reason was the ultimate tool for sifting through all that sensory data and figuring out what's really true.
So it's like our senses give us the raw ingredients, but it's reason that cooks them into a meaningful meal.
That's a great way to put it. Reason is the chef that helps us make sense of it all.
Okay, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
But, Descartes wasn't just obsessed with I think, therefore I am, and the mind-body problem. He tackled so many other big ideas, too, like in his book, Meditations on First Philosophy.
Ah, yes, the Meditations. A real deep dive into some heavy topics.
Right. Metaphysics, physics, ethics. He even takes on the existence of God.
It's a fascinating work, really trying to understand the nature of reality.
And when it came to God, he wasn't just relying on faith.
Right.
He actually used logic and reason to argue for God's existence.
Right, he used a variety of arguments. Like, he was famous for the ontological argument.
What's the ontological argument?
It basically says that God's existence is a necessary truth, because existence is a perfection, and God, being the most perfect being, cannot not exist.
Wait, so he's saying God has to exist because it's part of the very definition of God.
That's the basic idea. It's a pretty complex argument, but it shows how committed he was to using reason, even when it came to his religious beliefs.
So he was looking for that same kind of certainty, that same kind of proof in all areas of life.
Exactly. It was about a unified understanding of the world where faith and reason could coexist, even support each other.
Fascinating. And even though he didn't create a complete system of ethics, he had some interesting thoughts on how we should live.
Oh yeah, like his idea of provisional morality.
Provisional morality.
It was a set of guidelines, practical rules to live by while we're still searching for truth, sort of like a temporary compass while we figure things out.
What kind of rules were they?
Well, he had 4 main ones.
Okay, let's hear them.
1, obey the laws and customs of your country. 2, be resolute and decisive in your actions. 3, try to change yourself rather than trying to change the world. And 4, the most important one, dedicate yourself to the pursuit of truth.
Wow, those are actually pretty solid. Timeless even. I bet a lot of people today could benefit from those guidelines.
I think so too.
But let's not forget about science. Where did that fit into his grand scheme of things?
Well, Descartes actually saw science as a valuable ally to philosophy. He believed that science could expand our knowledge and strengthen the rational basis of philosophy.
Interesting. So not at odds, but working together.
Exactly. He thought that science could help us build a more complete and accurate picture of the world.
And speaking of ways to strengthen knowledge, wasn't Descartes big on having a specific method for seeking truth?
Oh, absolutely. He outlined it in his discourse on the method.
What was it all about?
It was a rigorous, systematic approach to knowledge, like a recipe for clear thinking.
Okay, break it down for us.
Well, there were 4 main rules. 1,
Yeah.
never accept anything as true unless you're completely certain. 2, break down complex problems into smaller, simpler parts. 3, start with the simplest things and work your way up to the more complex ones. And 4, review everything carefully to make sure you haven't missed anything.
Wow, it's like he was trying to create a foolproof system for finding truth.
Right. He wanted a method that was clear, logical, and reliable.
And probably not just for philosophy, right?
Right.
I bet those rules could apply to all sorts of fields.
Absolutely. It's a method for thinking, a way to approach any problem, whether it's scientific, philosophical, or even just everyday decision-making.
Amazing how his ideas still hold up today.
They really do.
So Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, the mathematician, the scientist, truly a remarkable mind.
A true Renaissance man.
We've only just scratched the surface of his work, though.
And there's so much more to explore.
So stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of Rene Descartes.
There's a lot more to come. You know, it's pretty amazing how, even after all these years, Descartes' ideas still feel so fresh and relevant.
I know, right? It's like he's speaking directly to us even centuries later.
His work really makes you think about those big questions, you know, the nature of reality, what is consciousness, the limits of knowledge.
Totally. And to really get into those big questions, we got to talk about his Meditations on First Philosophy, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Meditations. A classic.
It's like he's taking us on this journey inside his own mind.
Yeah, like a guided tour through his thought process.
Exactly. And he's searching for those unshakable truths, those foundational ideas that can withstand any doubt.
And he doesn't shy away from doubt. In fact, he embraces it.
Embraces doubt. That seems kind of counterintuitive for a philosopher looking for certainty.
Well, for Descartes, doubt was the starting point. It was the way to break free from all those assumptions we carry around, all those things we just take for granted.
I see. So by doubting everything, he could clear the way for real knowledge.
Exactly. He was trying to reach that bedrock of certainty by first clearing away all the debris of, well, uncertainty.
And of course, that led him back to his famous, I think, therefore I am.
Right, the certainty of his own existence as a thinking being. Even if he doubted everything else, he couldn't doubt that he was doubting.
It's such a mind-bending idea. But from that starting point, he goes on to tackle even bigger questions, like the existence of God.
Right, how do you prove God's existence, especially if you're a philosopher who prioritizes logic and reason?
Yeah, does he just rely on faith, or does he try to use logic to make his case?
Well, that's the fascinating tension in Descartes' work. He was a devout Catholic, but he wasn't satisfied with blind faith.
So he tried to find rational arguments to support his beliefs.
Exactly. He wanted to demonstrate God's existence through logic and reason. And one of his most famous arguments is the ontological argument.
We touched on that earlier, but can you remind us how that one goes?
Sure, it essentially says that God's existence is a necessary truth because existence is a perfection, and God, being the most perfect being, can't possibly lack existence.
Okay, so it's like saying, by definition, God has to exist.
Yeah, it's a tough one to wrap your head around.
It really is. But it shows how committed he was to using reason, even in matters of faith.
Absolutely. He wanted a unified understanding of the world where faith and reason could work together.
Okay, let's go back to the Meditations for a second. He talks a lot about this idea of substance. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. For Descartes, substance is basically anything that can exist on its own without needing something else to exist.
Okay, so like a fundamental building block of reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he identifies two main types: thinking substance and extended substance.
Thinking substance and extended substance.
Yeah. Thinking substance is all about the mind, consciousness, thoughts, ideas. It's immaterial.
And extended substance.
That's the physical stuff, the matter that makes up the world. It has extension, meaning it takes up space.
Right, so basically mind and body again, but this time is different types of substances.
Exactly.
But as we talked about earlier, this separation raises some tricky questions, like how do these two substances interact?
Right. If the mind is immaterial and the body is physical, how can they possibly influence each other?
Like how can a thought cause a physical action?
That's the million-dollar question, the mind-body problem that has plagued philosophers for centuries.
Did Descartes have any answers?
Well, he tried. He suggested the pineal gland, a small gland in the brain, might be the point of interaction.
But even he wasn't totally sold on that idea, right?
Not really. It was more of a hypothesis than a definitive answer.
So even a brilliant mind like Descartes couldn't fully solve that mystery.
It's a tough one, but that doesn't mean his insights aren't valuable.
Okay, so beyond that interaction problem, does Descartes address any other questions about how the mind works in the Meditations?
Oh, definitely. He talks about how the mind perceives the world through the senses.
Right, but he also emphasizes the role of reason in interpreting those perceptions, right?
Absolutely. He believed that reason was essential for sifting through sensory data and arriving at true knowledge.
So it's not enough to just see or hear something. We have to use our minds to make sense of it.
Exactly. Reason is the key to understanding.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've covered the Meditations, which is a really dense and complex work.
It is.
But Descartes wrote other things too, like the Passions of the Soul.
Ah, yes. A fascinating exploration of human emotions.
What's his take on emotions in that book?
Well, unlike a lot of philosophers at the time, he didn't see emotions as something negative or something to suppress.
Really? That's surprising.
He actually saw them as a natural and important part of human experience.
So how did he reconcile that view with his emphasis on logic and reason?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. He recognized that even though passions are mental experiences, they have a powerful impact on our physical bodies.
So he saw a connection between emotions and the physical world.
Yes. And he actually thought that passions were the main way that the mind and body interact.
Interesting. So our emotions are kind of like the bridge between the immaterial mind and the material body.
Exactly. And he went into detail about how this works. For example, let's say you see a beautiful sunset.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Your mind perceives it, judges it to be beautiful, and that judgment triggers a passion, in this case, maybe awe or wonder.
And then that feeling of awe affects my body.
Exactly. You might feel a sense of peace, your heart rate might slow down, you might even get goosebumps.
Wow, I never thought about it like that before. But what about the role of reason in all this?
Descartes believed that while reason can't completely eliminate passions, it can help us manage them and keep them from ruling our lives.
So it's about finding that balance between passion and reason.
Exactly. And that balance is key to living a good and fulfilling life. And for Descartes, the ultimate goal of life was happiness.
Happiness, but not just any kind of happiness, right?
Right. He defined it as the full realization of our intellectual and moral potential.
So it's about living a virtuous life guided by reason.
That's a big part of it. And he believed that passions, when guided by reason, could actually contribute to our happiness.
So it's not about suppressing our emotions, but about channeling them in a positive direction.
Exactly. It's about using our passions to fuel our pursuit of knowledge, virtue, and ultimately happiness.
Okay, so in The Passions of the Soul, he's really exploring the complexities of human nature.
He is. And he breaks down different types of passions, how they arise, and their effects. He even talks about how passions manifest physically in the body.
Really? How did he explain that connection?
Well, he used this idea of animal spirits.
Animal spirits, what are those?
It was an idea that went back to ancient Greek philosophy, but Descartes adopted it to explain how the mind and body interact. He believed that animal spirits were these subtle fluids that flowed throughout the body, carrying messages between the brain and the different organs.
Okay, so how did these animal spirits connect to our emotions?
Well, imagine you experience a strong emotion, like fear. That triggers the movement of animal spirits, which then affect your heart, your lungs, your glands, producing those physical reactions we associate with fear, like a racing heart, sweating, trembling.
So it's like a chain reaction. The mind experiences the emotion,
Yeah.
the animal spirits get activated, and then the body reacts.
Exactly.
It's pretty amazing how he tried to explain the mind-body connection, even with the limited scientific knowledge they had back then.
It really is. And even though he was a proponent of mind-body dualism, he still recognized that the two are deeply interconnected.
Like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
Wow, what a journey through the passions of the soul. It's amazing how Descartes' work touches on so many different aspects of human experience.
He was a truly multifaceted thinker.
And his ideas are still relevant today.
Absolutely. They make us think about who we are, how we experience the world, and what it means to live a good life.
And that's what makes him so fascinating.
Exactly.
Welcome back. We've been on quite a journey exploring Rene Descartes, his ideas on doubt, the mind-body problem, even his take on emotions.
It's been a wild ride, that's for sure.
It has. But now, in this final part, I'm curious about his legacy. Like, how did this 17th century philosopher shape how we think today?
Well, his impact is undeniable. I mean, he's often called the father of modern philosophy, and there's a reason for that.
So it makes him so important, even centuries later.
His emphasis on systematic doubt, for one. The idea that we should question everything, not just blindly accept what we're told.
Yeah, that's pretty revolutionary for his time.
It was. Before Descartes, philosophy was largely based on authority, Aristotle, the church, you know.
Just taking their word for it.
Right. But Descartes shifted the focus to the individual, the thinker, the doubter.
He empowered the individual mind.
Exactly. He said, hey, you have the power to reason, to figure things out for yourself.
Don't just take things at face value, think critically.
Exactly. And that had a huge impact on the course of philosophy, science, even culture.
So what were some of the lasting consequences of this new way of thinking?
Well, his ideas gave rise to all sorts of new movements.
Yeah.
Rationalism, empiricism, idealism, all these different ways of understanding the world, all grappling with the questions Descartes raised.
It's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. He set off this chain reaction of intellectual inquiry that we're still feeling the effects of today.
So he didn't just provide answers. He sparked new questions that are still relevant centuries later.
And it wasn't just philosophy he influenced.
Right. He was also a mathematician, a scientist, a real polymath.
Totally. And his work in those areas had a major impact too. Like his analytical geometry, combining algebra and geometry, it revolutionized math.
Seriously. So he's the reason we have calculus.
Well, not directly, but his work paved the way for later developments like calculus.
Okay, so indirectly responsible for all those late-night study sessions trying to understand calculus? Thanks, Descartes.
But seriously, his work in optics was also groundbreaking.
Optics?
Yeah, the study of light, how it bends, how it reflects, all that stuff. It was a major influence on the development of modern optics.
Wow. So he really was a man of many talents. But how did he reconcile all this scientific inquiry with his religious faith?
That's a question that still sparks debate. But for Descartes, there wasn't necessarily a conflict between science and faith.
He saw them as compatible.
Yeah, he actually believed that reason, far from contradicting faith, could actually support and strengthen it.
So, like, reason could help us understand the truths of faith more deeply.
Exactly. He was looking for a harmonious balance, a way to bring faith and reason together.
And that's an idea that's still relevant today as we navigate the relationship between science and religion. But I'm guessing not everyone agreed with his approach back then.
Of course not. There were plenty of critics. Some thought he was too rational, that he reduced faith to a set of proofs. Others thought he was a precursor to deism, a belief system that emphasized reason over revelation.
So he was a controversial figure.
Oh, definitely. He challenged the status quo. But even his critics couldn't deny his influence.
He went far beyond philosophy and science, right?
Absolutely. His ideas spread throughout culture. Thinkers, artists, writers, they were all influenced by his emphasis on reason, on individual thought.
So he helped shape the modern mindset.
In a way, yes. He encouraged people to think for themselves, to question authority, to seek truth through reason.
It's pretty incredible to think about the long-term impact of his ideas.
It is, and if we had to sum up his legacy in one word, I think it would be doubt.
Doubt. But wasn't he all about certainty?
Yes, but he believed that true certainty could only be achieved through rigorous doubt.
By questioning everything we think we know.
Exactly. And that spirit of inquiry, that commitment to critical thinking, that's his greatest gift to us.
Especially in today's world, with so much information and misinformation flying around.
We need that critical thinking now more than ever.
Absolutely. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of Rene Descartes.
It's been a pleasure exploring his ideas with you.
A huge thanks to you for guiding us through his complex and fascinating work.
It was my pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us.
Keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep exploring the world of ideas. Until next time.